It was 6:45 a.m. when I heard the kettle shriek. Not my kettle, but the one Louise brought in last month. My kettle had been a quiet hum, steam rising like a whisper. This one screamed as though the metal itself were being strangled. I turned on my side in bed, the old mattress groaning with me, and stared at the ceiling. The house no longer had silence. Not the kind I remembered. Every corner carried Louise's echo, her tapping heels, her clipped laughter. Her complaints about the cold tiles or the way my curtains let in too much light. I hadn't planned on this arrangement. When Robert, my nephew, called, his voice had carried that familiar earnestness, the sort that made me feel guilty before he even explained. "Aunt Margaret," he'd said, "you're the only one I can ask. Things are hard right now with Louise's job and the rent going up. It's temporary, just a couple of weeks. We'll be out of your hair before you know it." I'd paused, my hand resting on the arm of the chair in my sitting room. The light from the lamp haloing the crossword puzzle I had been halfway through. I loved Robert. I'd helped raise him after his father, my brother, lost his way in drink and debt. Robert had been bright, always reaching for books, always asking questions. I thought if anyone deserved a chance, it was him. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. That was 6 weeks ago. The kettle screamed again, followed by the sharp slam of a cabinet door. Louise's voice carried through the hallway. "Where's the cinnamon? Honestly, this kitchen is a mess. How does anyone live like this?" I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. My kitchen had always been neat, my drawers labeled, my pantry stocked. But Louise had her own ways. She shifted everything around. My sugar jar vanished behind protein powders. My tea collection boxed and shoved into the garage. My apron tossed somewhere I couldn't find. Each day something small disappeared, and in its place came something louder, brighter. Plastic where there had once been wood, metal where there had been ceramic. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my joints aching as they always did in the morning. The floor was cold. I reached for my robe, the one with the pale roses embroidered on the sleeve, a birthday gift from years ago. It smelled faintly of lavender still, though less so now with all the scented candles Louise burned in the evenings, candles that made the air thick with vanilla and musk. Until I could hardly breathe. When I entered the kitchen, Robert sat at the table, hair damp from a shower, scrolling his phone. He barely looked up. Louise was standing near the stove, one hand on her hip, the other stirring oatmeal in my pot. She glanced at me, her mouth curling. "You're up late again," she said. "We've already been waiting for breakfast. The oatmeal's too bland. Don't you have honey somewhere? Or do you just eat it like prison food?" Her words hit the air like darts. I kept my voice even. "There's honey in the top cupboard, near the spices." She rolled her eyes dramatically and clattered the spoon against the pot. "Who puts honey with spices? No wonder it takes me forever to find anything in this disaster of a kitchen." Robert chuckled softly, eyes still glued to his phone. I wanted to say something. I wanted to remind them that this was my house. Okay, my kitchen, my pots and cupboards. But the words stuck in my throat. I remembered my promise to myself. No arguments today. It was easier to be quiet, to let it pass. Louise poured the oatmeal into bowls, her nails clicking against the ceramic. She set one in front of Robert, then one in front of herself. She didn't bother making one for me. I took a teacup from the cupboard and set water to boil, ignoring the way the kettle shrieked once again. As I sipped my tea, Louise began her morning commentary. "You know, Robert, if we had our own place, I'd redo the kitchen completely. Open shelves, new countertops, an island in the middle. This whole setup is outdated. And the cabinets don't even get me started. They smell like old people," Robert murmured. Him, not lifting his eyes from the glowing screen. I looked down into my tea, watching the leaves drift at the bottom of the cup. Old people. The word sat heavy in my chest. Later that morning, after they both left Robert to work, Louise to her so-called fitness class, I wandered through my house. My house. I repeated the phrase in my head, though it felt less true every day. The guest room had been mine once, filled with sewing supplies and a small desk where I wrote letters. Now it was a jungle of Louise's clothes. shoes spilling out of open suitcases, perfume bottles cluttering the dresser. The master bedroom, mine for nearly 40 years. I had surrendered without protest. Robert insisted it made more sense for them. "We'll be more comfortable, Aunt Margaret. You don't mind, right? You'll still have your sewing room, except the sewing room was gone. So I slept now in the small guest space at the end of the hall, the bed narrow, the closet filled with boxes. It was enough, I told myself. Enough for a little while. That afternoon, as I folded laundry, I noticed one of my sweaters missing. A soft blue cardigan Robert had bought me years ago. I searched the basket twice, then the dryer, then the drawer where I usually kept it. Nothing. When Louise came home later, she was wearing it. She had belted it at the waist, the sleeves rolled up, her perfume clinging to the wool. She smiled faintly when she saw me staring. "Oh, this old thing. I found it in the laundry. Hope you don't mind. It's vintage looking. Sort of cozy chic. Don't worry, I'll give it back." I nodded slowly, though something in me tightened. She hadn't asked. She never asked. Days blurred. Louise began hosting her friends in the evenings. Loud voices spilling through the house, glasses clinking, laughter sharp and bright. I retreated to my small room, the sound muffled but unrelenting. Once I found the back door left unlocked after midnight. Another time the living room rug was stained with wine. Robert said little, always smiling awkwardly when I brought things up. "Louise just wants to feel at home, Aunt Margaret." She means well, but she didn't mean well. I could feel it. Each word, each gesture chipped away at me, made me smaller in my own home. It was the missing mail that broke me open. I had been expecting a package, a set of garden tools I ordered weeks ago. When it didn't arrive, I checked the mailbox. Empty. The next day, still empty. Finally, on the third day, I saw the corner of an envelope sticking out from under a stack of magazines in the kitchen drawer. The drawer. Louise claimed for her things. My name was on it. Postmarked a week earlier, I asked Robert about it that evening. He looked uncomfortable. Louise thought she'd be helpful, organizing the mail. She probably just put it there by mistake, but it wasn't a mistake. Because when I checked again later, quietly, I found another envelope shoved behind the magazines. A letter from the bank, and another from the insurance office. Both unopened. Both addressed to me. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelopes spread before me, my hands trembling. Why would she touch my bank statements? Why would she hide them? The kettle shrieked again behind me. Louise walked in, phone in hand, her face glowing with the light of the screen. She glanced at the table, then at me. "You don't need to worry about those boring letters," she said lightly. "Robert and I can handle all that for you. It's too much stress for someone your age." I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were sharp, calculating beneath the veneer of casual kindness. Her smile was thin. I realized then that this wasn't about clutter or convenience. It was about control. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. But something inside me stirred not fear. Not yet. Something quieter. A thread of suspicion winding itself into resolve. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, folded the letters neatly, and slid them into the pocket of my robe. That night, as I lay awake in the narrow bed, stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the house. Louise's laughter from the master bedroom, Robert's muffled voice. The creak of floorboards that had always been mine. They thought I was fading, too old to notice, too tired to fight. But I was noticing, I was collecting, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't just surviving in silence. I was planning. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, before the sun had fully risen. The house was still the kind of silence I used to treasure. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and padded into the kitchen. My letters were still in the pocket where I'd hidden them. I pulled them out and read them slowly, my eyes adjusting to the fine print. The first was routine, a notification of account activity. The second, though, made my pulse quicken. It referenced an inquiry about refinancing my mortgage. My mortgage. The house had been mine, paid off years ago after decades of work. I had no reason to refinance. My tea went cold as I stared at the page. The paper trembled faintly in my hands. Someone had made that inquiry, and it hadn't been me. The floorboard creaked. I quickly folded the letter, sliding it beneath the napkin holder on the counter. Louise entered the kitchen, her hair wrapped in a towel, her phone already pressed to her ear. She smiled at me in that thin way of hers and said into the receiver, "Yes, we'll have the documents ready by Friday. Don't worry, it's all under control." She didn't notice the way I froze. Didn't notice the letter half hidden on the counter. She breezed past, her perfume filling the air, and went out the back door. The second she was gone, I retrieved the letter again. My suspicions solidified like ice. She was trying to take my house. I thought of Robert, my sweet Robert. The boy who once tugged on my sleeve and asked me to read him stories by the fire. Could he really be part of this? Could he stand by and let her strip me of everything? I wanted to believe he didn't know. I wanted to, but the memory of his awkward smiles, his dismissive words, pressed hard against that hope. I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer of the side table in my room. Under the sewing patterns no one touched. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the pale morning light filtering through the curtains. My hands trembled, but my mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. I needed help that afternoon. When Louise left again, I put on my coat and walked 2 houses down to Irene's. Irene was my neighbor, a widow like me, and though we didn't see each other daily anymore, there was still a quiet bond between us. She answered the door quickly, surprise flickering into warmth. "Margaret." "Well, it's been a while. Come in, come in." Her living room smelled of fresh coffee and lemon polish, the way mine used to before the candles and noise. I told her everything in a low voice: the missing mail, the bank letters, the talk of refinancing. Her expression hardened as I spoke. "You didn't sign anything?" she asked sharply. "Of course not," I said. "But I'm afraid she might try to." Irene rose and fetched her tablet from the sideboard. She was quicker with technology than I was, her fingers moving over the screen with confidence. "We'll check the county records," she said. "If there's been any movement on your deed, it'll show up here." I watched her face as she scrolled. I saw the moment her lips pressed tight. She turned the screen toward me. There it was. An application for refinancing submitted under both Robert's and Louise's names. My stomach clenched. My name wasn't on it. Yet it was my house. My deed. "They can't do this," I whispered. "They can try," Irene said grimly. "But it's fraud. And if they're forging your signature, you need to act fast." The word fraud echoed in my mind like a bell. I nodded slowly. "I'll need a lawyer." Irene's hand covered mine. "Do you still have Deborah's number? She helped you with your pension, didn't she?" I did. And that evening I dialed it with shaking hands. Deborah answered on the second ring, her voice calm, steady. I explained everything: the missing mail, the refinance attempt, the application. She listened carefully, then said, "Margaret, don't sign anything they put in front of you. Not a scrap of paper. I'll draft an affidavit confirming your sole ownership based on county records. Once it's notarized, we'll have legal proof in hand. That will give us leverage." Relief flickered faintly in me. For the first time in weeks, I felt less like a shadow in my own house. The next days I moved carefully, pretending nothing had changed. Louise still clattered through the kitchen, mocking my recipes, rearranging cupboards. Robert still scrolled his phone, avoiding my gaze. I stayed quiet, kept folding their laundry, kept setting the table. Let them think I was yielding. But in the evenings, in my room, I gathered every file I had. The deed, the tax bills, the utility records, all with my name. Each document felt like a stone, and I stacked them carefully into a fortress of paper. When Deborah's affidavit arrived, notarized and stamped, I held it in my hands for a long moment, tracing the letters of my name, mine, my house, my life. I tucked it safely away. 3 days later, Deputy came to the door. It was a gray morning, rain streaking the windows. Louise was in mid-complaint at the table, jabbing her fork at the eggs I'd cooked. "Rubbery again?" she sneered. Robert sat beside her, half asleep, his phone glowing in his hand. When the knock came, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door. The deputy stood tall, his expression formal. "Mrs. Margaret Alden?" He asked. "Yes." He tipped his hat. "I'm here to serve notice of eviction. Court authorized, filed, and signed. They have 72 hours to vacate the premises." I stepped aside, calm as stone, and let him in. He walked to the dining table, unfolded the papers, and placed them neatly between the orange juice and the butter dish. Louise froze, her fork midair. Robert's phone slipped from his hand. "What is this?" Louise demanded, her eyes darting across the page. The deputy spoke evenly. "By order of the court, you are required to vacate this residence within 72 hours. Her voice rose into a shriek. "You can't do this. This is our home too." The deputy remained steady. "You have 72 hours to remove your belongings. After that, enforcement becomes mandatory." Robert stood now, his eyes wide, panic flickering across his face. "Aunt Margaret, what's going on?" "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked over, picked up the butter knife, and nudged the eviction notice an inch closer to Louise's plate. Then I turned back to the sink and resumed rinsing mugs. "Behind me?" Louise shouted. Robert pleaded. The deputy repeated his terms. But I heard none of it. I let the water run over my hands, cool and steady, washing the last tremors from my skin. That evening, my phone buzzed relentlessly. I hadn't told anyone, hadn't posted anything, but Louise had. A photo of suitcases on the lawn, her caption dripping with false pity. "Imagine your own aunt evicting you. We're homeless now." Some people have no heart. Comments poured in. Strangers called me cruel, selfish, unfit to live alone. One wrote that I belonged in a nursing home. I scrolled in silence, breathing deeply. Then, slowly, the tide turned. A woman I didn't know commented with a screenshot from county records. "The deed is in her name only." That's not eviction. That's protection. Another added, "Wait, wasn't there a refinance application filed 2 weeks ago?" Fraud. And then the hammer fell. Someone traced Robert's name to his employer, a regional supply firm. A public post appeared on their page. "Is this the same Robert Alden who submitted false home improvement receipts under business expenses?" Within hours, Robert's social media vanished. Louise's too. A thin apology surfaced, clearly forced. "We're going through a difficult time. Please respect our privacy." But the damage had been done. The next day, Robert came to the house alone. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes shadowed. He looked like the boy I once knew, but smaller, somehow diminished. "Aunt Margaret," he said, his voice breaking. I wanted to talk." I said nothing, only let him fill the silence. "I messed up. Louise got carried away, and I didn't stop her. I should have told you. Can we just start over?" I held his gaze steady as stone. "I did start over," I said quietly. "That's why you're not here anymore." He flinched, his mouth opening and closing like a fish caught on dry land. But I didn't soften. I didn't reach for him. I simply closed the door. Then I turned the lock. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was light like breath, like the house itself. Exhaling. In the weeks that followed, I planted herbs in the kitchen, window basil, mint, lavender. The air filled with green and earth again, not perfume and smoke. Irene brought pies, we shared coffee, and the quiet was no longer loneliness, but peace. Months passed. The house was mine again. Every creak of the floorboards, every hiss of the faucet belonged to me. People asked if I was lonely. I always said no. Lonely is living with people who erase you. Peace is living alone with space to breathe. I framed the deed and hung it in the hallway. Not for anyone else to see. No one entered unless I invited them, but for me. A reminder in bold ink. Margaret Alden, sole owner. I traced the letters with my finger and smiled. For the first time in years, I was whole.